All right, guys. It's 11:03, so I'll get started. First by introducing Miss Deanna Tomaselli, who is joining us today for our fourth PR Week session. Almost to the end. Deanna is Vice President of Client Services at The Motherhood. Deanna is a results-driven, award-winning communications professional with experience in consumer and B2B PR, marketing, and social media in both agency and corporate settings, including Red Havas and Rue 21. At The Motherhood, Deanna brings her vast skill set of social media, influencer marketing, and traditional PR to flawlessly execute winning campaigns for clients. Deanna was named one of Pittsburgh Magazine's 40 Under 40 honorees, as well as Member of the Year by PRSA. She serves on the PRSA Pittsburgh Board and the Slippery Rock University Communication Department Advisory Board. Deanna will be speaking with us about the ins and outs of working in an agency, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, Deanna, you can take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here. I have spoken at Waynesburg once. It was a few years ago, so I'm excited to virtually be back and talk to you guys today. And yeah, if you have questions throughout, please feel free. If not, at the end as well, I'll be happy to answer any questions. So with that, I will get started on the ins and outs of working in an agency. So a little bit about me. As mentioned, I work at The Motherhood. It is an influencer marketing agency here in Pittsburgh. Actually, it's one of the first influencer marketing agencies. It was started by a woman named Cooper Monroe, and she was an agency veteran for years and years and got into blogging and the power of blogging over 10 years ago and decided to do that full time. So we connect influencers and brands to put together campaigns for them. So it's a little bit different than a traditional PR agency, but we all come from PR backgrounds. And I think that really works well for what we do. But yeah, I've been primarily worked in agencies my entire career. And I have a little bit of corporate background. I have a dog named Hugo, so I'm a dog mom. And I've been in Pittsburgh most of my life. So my school and my career have all been in Pittsburgh, which is just a little bit of background too. So wanted to talk through my career path and talk to you guys a little bit about how I got to where I am today. So these are all some logos, so I'll kind of take you through some history. I graduated from Slippery Rock in 2006 with a bachelor's degree in public relations. I focused in on that. I was undecided when I first came to school, and then I was I went the communication track, was torn between journalism and PR, and ultimately, after taking an intro to PR class with a wonderful professor who I'm still in touch with today, I decided PR was the route to go. And I think we had an agency tour one year through PRSSA, and I think it was at Ketchum, which is no longer in Pittsburgh, but that was one of the top PR agencies here. And I just kind of got to really be interested in agencies. And I'm like, this is what I want to do when I graduate. So I just had it in my mind, I wanted to work in an agency. So when I graduated, I actually had one internship. It wasn't at an agency. I didn't have a ton of experience yet, which was tough because if you have ever applied to work at an agency, they always want agency background, which is kind of the catch-22. So I decided to take advantage of being downtown in Pittsburgh. I worked through Highmark when I first graduated, not doing anything in communications, but I had gotten a job and took advantage of being in a big company downtown, and I would go to PRSA lunches or dinners and network. I networked within my department and saw opportunity to write for a newsletter. So I kind of did that. And then Mark USA, which is now called, I think it's 9 Rooftops, they had a job opening for an apprentice. And it was basically an intern, but somebody who had already graduated. And at that point, I would have taken a pay cut and not had benefits because of what I had at Highmark. But I thought, you know what, this is the time to do it because I want that experience. And fortunately, I was living at home with my parents and was able to go back to their insurance, or maybe I got my own, I can't remember. But I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to be able to do so. So I ended up getting the job and I started working at Mark USA. I think it was early 2007-ish. And I worked on a variety of accounts. So I learned about working, and this was an advertising agency. So I learned about working on a variety of clients, traditional PR, I really got a great learning experience, and they ended up hiring me full time. And at that point, social media wasn't even a thing for business. It was just starting. Some people had Facebook, like I got it in college, and only college students could have it at that point. We had MySpace, like that was all that was going on. But Twitter started around 2008, and we were talking about it one day in a meeting for a client, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to recommend this to a client, I may as well get to know it. And so I joined Twitter, I remember, and Twitter still tells you when you join, so it's like, I think it says September 2008. I'm like, wow, I've been on Twitter for a long time. But yeah, that's when I really got to understand the ins and outs of social, and not many people understood it then. They didn't know where it was going. Of course, as we've seen over this past decade or more, it blew up, and it's been such an integral part of life, really. But at that point, I just learned it because there were no social courses. There was no class you could take. It was all just going online and trying things out. So I think that really was helpful to me early on because people took notice of that. I had been in contact with WordWrite at that point, their CEO I've always talked to, and he had a job opening. And he thought of me because he was impressed at my know-how with social. So they ended up recruiting me to go there. And then I worked there for about 2 years, and then Mark recruited me back because they had more opportunity to work with social media. So I think that is a testament to really understanding your craft and getting to know something and not just doing the bare minimum. You know, you could take a class or you could do your work, but it's like going above and beyond. And I was reading blogs and you know, talking to people about social and really learning it. And that was really important early on. So WordWrite is a smaller PR only agency, and Mark, as I said, is advertising, and it's in a couple of different cities. So I'll talk about kind of the differences of agencies in a minute. So that was kind of my early path there. From there, I went to a couple other smaller agencies in between, kind of jumped around a little bit. At that point too, I was kind of like, where do I want to go next? So I ended up applying for a job at Route 21, and it's a fashion retailer based in Warrendale, just outside of Pittsburgh, and got the job. And that was cool because that was the only job I've ever applied to that I didn't know anyone or, you know, anything like that. So I was able to start working at Route 21. They hired me after I interviewed. And that was a cool way to really get to know retail and go on the corporate side of things. Because at that point, I'd only worked for agencies. I only had clients. So it was a really great experience. And I worked there for about 4 or 5 years. As you know, retail has not been in the best of shapes these last couple of years with bankruptcy and just the shift in consumer behavior, the behemoths of Amazon. So Route 21, unfortunately, was one of the retailers who filed for bankruptcy. They closed hundreds of stores. There were layoffs. And fortunately, I was not one of the people laid off at that point, but I thought, you know what, now's a good time to get out and see. And fortunately, at that point, I was recruited to go to Havas. Red Havas, it's called. Havas is a global PR agency / they have advertising, media. It's a huge company, and they have an office here in Pittsburgh that's just PR out of their New York office. So I was able to work there for a few years. And then just a few months ago, I switched again. So I was I've known the CEO of the Motherhood for a number of years. Another friend works there, and they thought of me for this job opening that they had. So after speaking with them, I wasn't looking for a new job. It was just a really good fit, and I'm glad I did it because I really enjoy influencer marketing. I did it a lot at Route 21. I did a little bit at Havas. So I think it's a really cool space, and it's a great way to tell brand stories. So I've been at the Motherhood for just a couple of months, like 3 months now. And I'm excited to see where 2021 goes. So that's kind of my long-winded career path. In the meantime, you know, I've been involved in PRSA since school. You know, I was in PRSSA. I've been on the board for PRSA Pittsburgh for a number of years. It's been great to meet people and network and learn. In addition to that, I also was the chapter president of Elevate. It's a global women's networking organization, and met a lot of cool people through that, and also branched out of just the PR network there, which was really important to me, just to meet women in other industries like banking or finance or law. So that was a cool experience as well. I was a member of 40 Under 40, which was a big honor. And I also do a blog. It's called Pretty in Pittsburgh, and I've had it since 2009. I stopped for a couple of years, but I started back up. So I basically just talk about marketing and PR and industry stuff, and then a little bit of health and fitness, because that's also in my interest. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, but it's just my little side project that I really enjoy. It's a creative outlet for me. So that is my kind of career path. So with that, I'm going to talk about working in an agency. So I found this horrible graphic online. So it's not pretty, but it gives a good indication of kind of the hierarchy in working in an agency. Sorry, I have like the driest mouth, so I'm just going to be taking sips of water every now and then. But as you can see, this is kind of the structure. So there's, this isn't always the case, but there's kind of like a president, or, it could even be a CEO. It depends on what organization you're in. So that's the top person there. And then there's, your VP level, and then your directors. And then from there, there's account supervisors. And then under there's, there could be senior account executive, junior account executive, or associate, or assistant account executive. There's different names at different places. And then under that too, a Havas, for example, they have fellows. So it's basically when you're first hired, you're a fellow. And then, if you essentially do well, then you get to be an account executive role. And then under that too is interns. So there's interns as well in the structure. And this looks different, and there's different titles at different places. But basically, like, the more junior you are, you're mostly an account executive. So you're doing a lot of the, say it's reporting and measurement and analytics piece of things, or you're putting together press releases or media lists, doing research, that type of thing. As you get a little bit more in your career, it's maybe you're client facing. So if you're an account supervisor, maybe you're running the day-to-day account, and you're talking to the clients, you're talking to other departments and that type of thing. So this is again, not the prettiest graphic, but it gives you an idea of kind of how the structure is. And then I also wanted to share this graphic, which this one before is basically like, if you're working in a PR agency, like this is kind of your wheelhouse here and your team. But if you're working in a more integrated agency, you're going to have more things than just, your traditional PR. So it's usually earned, shared, owned, and paid. So earned media is your traditional PR. You're doing media relations heavily, some influencer stuff. And then shared media, you're doing more of the social piece. Owned media, it's more of like website, your own channels there. And then paid media is, talking about affiliate marketing or advertising or that type of thing. So at an agency like Mark USA that I worked at, we did all of this. We had, for example, I worked on the Pennsylvania Lottery account, which was their biggest account at the time. And I don't even know if they still have them there, but their paid media budget was huge. If you live in Pennsylvania, you've seen a Pennsylvania Lottery commercial time and again. And you've seen Gus the Groundhog, like that's paid media. They're paying for those spots. They're doing it on TV, radio, your traditional things, but also like if you do a Google search, it pops up first. So we would do that. And then, you'd have your social channels. So you were talking about the Pennsylvania Lottery on social, while also the TV spot was running, placed in these different spots. So we all kind of worked together to produce content for the same brand. And they were coming from all of these different avenues. It's not necessarily all of this, but this is a good indication of all the different channels that agencies have. So I want to talk about too, so actually before I talk about agency versus corporate, so if you're working in an advertising agency, like I said, you might be on the PR team, but there's departments that have advertising, media buying and planning, there's research, there's creative, there's developers and designers. It all depends on what the offerings of the agency are, but and typically if you have all of this, you're a bigger agency. So in Pittsburgh, for example, Havas and BCW, which was Burson Marsteller and Cohen and Wolf, they merged to become BCW. So those two agencies are the biggest ones in Pittsburgh. They have a global footprint. So BCW and Havas work with counterparts in different cities here in this country and then globally. So I think those are the two biggest footprints, and they have access to all of this stuff. You know, even if their agency doesn't do something, they can, you know, talk to a company in their same agency and maybe Boston or New York and say, hey, we need some design work for this, or maybe we need some paid media. We don't do it in this office, but this is part of it. So, you know, that happens too. And then if you get a little smaller, then if you go to like the Mark USA, which is 9 rooftops now, or Brunner, for example, those are some of the next level size wise. So they've got presence in different cities, but they also do a number of things too. So they're doing advertising, marketing, PR. And then you have even smaller companies like a WordWrite that I worked at, which is a smaller PR only shop. And they do primarily the earned piece of it. And they're doing a lot of like your media relations and influencer stuff, but they also work with other people too. Like they have people to help with SEO or Google Analytics or design. So they can maybe, you know, hire out somebody to work freelance. It all depends. So there's a lot of different agencies that do different things. And if you don't have all the capabilities, you work with somebody to help pull that in. So that's kind of how that works. And that's a big piece of it too. So when you do work in an agency, you know, say right now you're planning for 2021, you have to think about what all the things you're going to do for clients for 2021 and plan that and budget for it. So if you know that your agency only does media relations, but you need some design things for 2021, you're going to factor that in. So you're going to, when you're doing that planning, you're going to talk about like, okay, you know, we need X amount of money for this. And I think when you first started an agency, you don't have to be tasked with that. You just kind of learn the ins and outs. And then as you grow and learn, then you can start really doing more budgeting and planning and that type of thing. But it's also so important to understand all the ins and outs so that you can factor in, you know, what budget you need and that type of thing. So that way you can accurately say, okay, we're going to spend, I don't know, $50,000 on this client for Q1. And this is what all that goes into it. That's your fees of how much time you're spending, but also out of pocket things like design, or if you work with a third party vendor on something and they can do something like that, you put all that into that. So I think a big piece of agency life is understanding how much money and time things are going to take so you can, you know, accurately bill your clients and ultimately be profitable. So that's a big piece of it. So that, all that to say, I want to talk a little bit about agency versus corporate. So these are just some very high level bullets I put together, but so for agencies, some of the things to keep in mind is there's a variety of work. At any given time, you could have a number of clients. If you get into a bigger company, you might have only 2 or 3, maybe 1, depending on who it is. You know, if you're working in a big New York agency and you have Dove as a client, then you're primarily just working on Dove, who I think is through Procter & Gamble. But anyways, so that's an example. But if you work at a smaller shop, you're maybe working on 6 different accounts. It all depends. But the variety is there. You know, for example, I've worked on everything from HVAC to fast food to a retirement community to optical. So I've had a variety of things. So that's never short of boring, for sure. So the variety is definitely there. And even your, you know, week to week, month to month, year to year, things change too. Like maybe one quarter, I'm really focused on writing and putting together collateral for eye doctors. But then the next quarter, I'm focused on writing speeches or doing a lot of media relations. It all just depends on the timing and the needs of the client. For agency, you can integrate with other services. Like I mentioned, like when I worked on the PA lottery account, I would see the storyboards of commercials and the ideas and the pitch that the creative team put together, which was really cool to just sit in and see it. It's like, okay, picture this. It's a weekday and there's 2 women sitting on a bench or something like that. And they'd storyboard it and you would see that and they'd, you know, pitch that to the client, and maybe there was 2 other ideas, and you would see how these kind of ads come to life. And then you would take that and use it within what you were doing. So if we were doing social, we're talking about, okay, how do we talk about that ad on social or something like that? So it's a really great way to integrate and work together with other people too. And sometimes you're managing somebody like a developer if you're putting together a website or something like that. So it's a great way to integrate. There is a lot of time entry and restraints there. So you have to bill all of your time to your clients when you work in an agency. Because like I said, you have to make sure you're, not overspending or underspending. You want to be mindful of the time because that's how much you told them that they would pay for. It's a service you're providing. So you don't want to spend 50 hours on something that should have taken 10, and you don't want to spend 10 hours on something that should have taken 50. So you have to kind of really learn that balance. And it's not exact. It's never going to be exact, but there's a little bit more restraint in that. So that could be a little bit tricky. And then you are the vendor. So you're working for clients. So you are their person to get back to and all of that. So you are essentially their vendor. Another thing with agency too is new business. So, you've got a steady stream of clients, but you always want new business coming in because you never know if one client won't work with you anymore or you're going to lose something. So you always want to have that pipeline going in. So new business is a great opportunity to work on things that are new. You want to pitch business and see if you win it. You'll maybe see something like, oh, so-and-so is the agency of record for this company. And it's that's how it starts. There's an RFP that's out, request for proposal. You come back with a proposal. And then if you get that far, then maybe they bring in 2 or 3 companies to pitch the business. So you put together these creative ideas and it takes a lot of time, but they're so rewarding when you win them. 2 years ago at Havas, I worked on the new business pitch for UNICEF. And it was a beast, I'm not gonna lie, but it was amazing. And we won the business and I was able to work on some amazing things for UNICEF, which is a global nonprofit. And, the work that I did was really rewarding. So I think that was a good, indicator of something that was a really cool result of new business. So with corporate, it's more of a steady stream of work. It's very similar too. So you're working on one client, which is your company. It's not a cloud client, but just for the sake of this presentation. So you're working day to day on one thing. And I think that's cool in a way because yes, it's less variety, but you become the expert and you know the ins and outs. You're also able to integrate with other departments. So like at Route 21, for example, I worked a lot with the merchant team who does all the buying for the clothing to come into the store. So there was the women's team there was bottoms, there was tops, there was dresses, there was all kinds of people who brought in this merchandise. And I learned what the best sellers were, what they wanted to promote. So we would have meetings every week to talk about what we were going to shoot with the creative team. They would bring it into the photo studio, shoot the photos, edit them, give it back to me because I was doing the Instagram. So it was a cool way to see like what are the top 7 picks of the week between the women's and men's department. What are we going to showcase? So it was really great way to learn other departments and kind of how the business worked. And speaking of which, you are ingrained in the business. You see the financials. You're seeing all of the behind the scenes, which is a really cool thing. I think a corporate job is sometimes less sexy than an agency job, depending on the company. And it's a little bit slower and more traditional. Traditionally, I should say, and it's not the same for every company. There's different places that are way more forward thinking, and there's more that are a little bit more traditional. So it all just depends. But traditionally, a corporate job is a little slower pace, and steadier work with less variety. But that's not to say you're not busy. You've got meetings all day and you've got a lot of tasks and you're working with the vendor. So maybe you are working with the agency. So I think there's pros and cons to both. I really do. And I think that it all just depends on what you want and what you're interested in. And sometimes it depends on what you get too. Maybe you applied for both and maybe you got a corporate job. So you start with corporate, but you really learn the company from the ground up from day one. And then that could maybe move you to an agency later. So I think there's definitely pros and cons to both. And some tips for success. So I wanted to talk about, I have two sets of tips. So this is for young agency pros. So these are some tips if you are getting into the agency business. I think an internship is your best foot forward and foot in the door, but that's not to say you can't get an agency job without an internship. I did not have one, I got one, but you have to kind of put in the work. So once you are there, spend that extra time learning and researching. It's so important to make sure to learn the ins and outs of all your clients, but also your other departments and, just within the industry. So reading Social Media Today, for example, if you want to work in social media, or Reagan.com, which is a lot of PR and media relations. So setting up those Google alerts, going to webinars, just spending that extra time will be so important. And then following your clients' competitors on social media to see what new campaigns they're putting out, what their brand voice is like, what news they have, et cetera. So you can kind of keep a pulse on what, their competitors are doing, so you could speak to that. And also raising your hand and anticipating needs. If somebody asks for a volunteer, if you're vocal and you're willing, that goes such a long way. So don't be afraid to do extra work and everything like that, because people take note. And also, once you get to learn your boss and how they work, anticipating their needs is so crucial. My last boss, I would kind of understand when she needed me without her telling me. I just kind of learned that. So anticipating her needs, she would be so grateful. And that goes a long way as well. And also to have a good time management system in place, like, use a planner or a calendar or something like that, keeping track of how much time you're spending on things, knowing how much time to spend, because you are working on such a variety of things. Within several clients, there's several projects, so it's a lot of balls to juggle. So having that good system in place is key. And then finding a mentor. Some companies offer mentors, but others don't. So if you can find somebody in your company or somebody in your industry or just somebody that you look up to, I think that's so important. That way you can kind of bounce ideas off them and just have someone to talk to and vent to. That's really important. And then having a positive attitude. You're not working in a hospital, you're not saving lives per se, depending on where you work, but it gets to be stressful, but keeping that positivity is so important for your well-being and for others around you, and people appreciate that. So I think having a positive attitude goes such a long way. And then here's some more general tips just for young PR professionals in general. Doing your research, I think, talking about where you want to work and learning about companies. So if you are working in Pittsburgh, what companies are there, what agencies versus corporate versus nonprofits, looking online and seeing what they're saying on their websites, on social, on LinkedIn, and who works there. You can find people through LinkedIn so easily. Networking, if you get anything out of this today, if you remember one thing, it's to network. I found my building up a network early on was so helpful, because now people call me for jobs. I don't have to go find them. And that's not the only reason to network, but it's important that you do so. So you're building that up, even when you don't need a job. Once you get a job, it's still important, because you never know when you're going to lose a job, or when you're going to need just somebody to maybe participate in something or ask a question for. So doing that networking is so important. And I know it's tough right now because there's not in-person things, but that's not to say you can't message someone on LinkedIn and maybe strike up a conversation and do a informal, coffee virtual or something like that. Following up is important too. Once you do network with somebody, don't let them lose sight of you, because a lot of the times I'll connect with somebody and then I'll forget all about them because I never hear from them again. Social media makes it so easy. Like a post, comment on something, send them an email, just check in and say hi. So keeping top of mind is so important as well. And keep learning and growing your expertise. Like I mentioned early on, I just learned about social because I had an interest in it. And I still do. I read blogs. I keep up with, the industry and what's happening. That way my expertise never kind of fizzles. I'm always learning. And join professional organizations. So shameless plug, If you are not part of the PRSA Pittsburgh Young Professionals group on Facebook, I suggest you join. We have like 150 members and growing. We put job openings there. We have an Ask Me Anything series with our members. We've got, actually tonight at 5:30, we are interviewing the Dick's Sporting Goods SEO team. It's free on Zoom. If you go to PRSA/PGH.org, it's on there. I know Waynesburg is all over PRSA, so I don't have to tell you guys, but definitely join. And say thank you. Oftentimes I'll get a question on email and I'll respond, and then I don't hear back. And it's like, well, did you get my email? Did you understand? And when I give somebody advice, even if it's not what they want to hear, sometimes they don't respond to the email. I'm like, just say, hey, thank you so much for your insight. That's all I need. But sometimes, you know, people forget to do that. So definitely make sure you do that. And then promote yourself. You know, this kind of goes in line with the last point too, of impress others. You're the only one who can promote yourself. So put what you're doing on LinkedIn, tag companies, you know, be out there, because I've put myself out there with my blog and just social in general, and that's been noticed. So I can't stress that enough. You know, if you did something cool in class or you wrote a blog post, put that out there, because people take note of that. And as you're networking and building up that network, they'll see it and be like, wow, this person really knows their stuff. So again, promoting, it impresses others. I think that's also so important. And with that, that's my very quick explanation. I definitely want to open it up to questions, and I want to share some links here. My blog is prettynpgh.com. My company, themotherhood.com. It's called, we originally work with mom bloggers, so that's why it's called The Motherhood, but we work with all kinds of influencers. And then my email and LinkedIn are below too. So please feel free to message me, connect with me on LinkedIn after this. If you have questions that you don't want to ask now, I'm definitely open. Please, you know, send me a message and I'm happy to connect. I spoke to Duquesne's PRSSA last week, and a couple of the members have been, you know, messaging me on LinkedIn, and it's great. I love it, because it's like, hey, I wanted to ask you about this. It's like, yeah, please feel free. So I'm always open. And yeah, please join the Facebook group if you're not on there already, and post away. We love when people proactively post there. I'm always talking on there, so we love student engagement. So again, tonight at 5:30 with Dick's Sporting Goods, it's free on Zoom. And then next Thursday, I'm going to be talking with the PR person from Eaton Park, and we're going to be doing that live on Facebook. So what questions can I answer? Anyone? And if you don't have a question now, you can message me later too.
What's your favorite thing about your job right now?
I think my favorite thing is identifying influencers. So when we get a new client campaign, it's really cool to see you know, who's out there that could be a good fit, and knowing, you know, we've got a whole platform of people that we work with, but also finding new people. So I think it's that matching of influencer to brand to tell that story. I think that's a really creative way. Plus I like to spend time on Instagram anyway, so it's like I could do that for work. So I think that's a really cool aspect of it.
Yes.
Do you think so you said you really like Instagram. What do you think is like kind of top priority when it comes to social media platforms? You said you kind of had an interest in that and working with social media. What are kind of the most impactful, do you think?
Right now, I think it's definitely Instagram and Facebook, because Instagram's owned by Facebook, and also because, so we'll do a campaign, for example, and an influencer will do some posts, but we also boost those posts and we put money behind it so more people see it. And you really can do a nice job of that through Instagram and Facebook. So we usually have in our contracts like at least one post on Instagram or Facebook so that we can promote it. And I think too, Instagram's doing a nice job, and I think Facebook too, with new tools and things. Like Facebook has like the lives you could do, but also you could do a watch party. So if you have a group, you could do a watch party together and watch the same video and then comment on it afterward. And like Instagram is doing Reels now, which is a complete ripoff of TikTok, but it's helping. So you know, I think they do a nice job of putting the new tools out there, but there's the things over here like your TikTok that is so much more creative. And I think there's so much more opportunity on TikTok.